Jon Jones, UFC fighter, cover athlete, light heavyweight champion, and an all-around normal human being.
You know I would absolutely kill you if you ever did something like that.
We're switching gears this time around. I want to yap about the UFC for a bit. See, I was scrolling through the app, formerly known as Twitter, and then I see this post depicting Jon Jones ducking Francis Ngannou. Now, I wasn't as concerningly into the UFC back then compared to now, so I thought I misremembered what happened. This got me to fling out a question, asking if it was 100% confirmed that this was the case. And after scrolling through the replies, I concluded that I was much better off doing the research my damn self. Which brings me here, one question that I'm trying to find the answer to. Did Jon Jones duck Francis Ngannou? I'm not going to risk getting sniped by UFC for using their fight footage, so I'm going to go with plan B. You better be thankful for this sacrifice. Side note, I only touched UFC 5 a handful of times since the review, and every time I did, I'm quickly reminded of how butt this game is. However, when I saw that they added the spear as a venue option, I was actually interested in seeing what it looks like. It looks like shit. The crazy graphics and a unique presentation that it's known for is non-existent here. No fighter entrances, no Mexican ring girls, no AR graphics, just enjoy the Sean vs. Marab graphic and shut up. This game sucks. First, I need to do a little bit of some necessary CYA to set things straight, and to deter the Jon Jones dick rider accusations. Yes, I do believe that Jon Jones is arguably the best UFC light heavyweight champion of all time with one of the best fight IQs of all time. With that being said, he is a generational hooligan. Inside the octagon, this man has ushered in the new era of eye poking. Every time his opponent even thinks of advancing, Jon throws up the scissors and makes them pay. And it didn't matter which referee was right there, they'll act as if it's legal. If Jon didn't exist, we would have never had the chance to experience the masterclass Chris Weidman put on against Bruno Silva. Dude pulled off the first ever win via 1-2 eye poke in MMA history. He was able to scratch Silva's frontal lobe. That's how deep he was. Pause. It was so crazy that DC and the gang clowned him during the UFC 300 weigh-in show. Hey, wait a minute! Outside of the octagon though, how do I put this? This man is a menace. On one night, dude drank a shit ton of alcohol and then drove his car into a telephone pole, injuring 2 passengers. No jail time, only a 6-month license suspension with a fine. Bro got drunk, drove somewhere, shot his gun, and got arrested. No jail time, only house arrest. One time, homie went out for a drive after beating DC, probably drunk, and then he hits a car that had a pregnant woman inside. And ran. Hit and run, nigga, that is a felony. How did he beat the case? I mean, he didn't, he pled guilty, but he got no jail time. For those who don't know, that barely scratches the surface. Other shit includes a time where he was apparently drunk and allegedly threatened to smoke the anti-doping tester's pack. And I have to bring up the domestic incident that got him kicked out of the Jackson Wink gym, the place where he spent the majority of his UFC career training at. So I'll throw this out there, I don't think he's a good person. And just in case anybody asks, I don't care about the PEDs because I could have sworn that everybody who fought in the UFC was on the juice, except for the Diaz brothers and Mark Hunt. Besides, most of these fighters don't care if their opponent pissed a hole through a cup, so to speak. The only reason Tom Aspinall brought it up against him is because Jon is being a dick. Now, if you want to argue that he was dumb enough to get caught on multiple occasions, that's fine. Cool, with all of that stuff finished, let's get the weight gain shit out of the way first, because not only is it the easiest to justify, it also leads into the other key points in the situation. The question can be simply boiled down to, why did it take so long for Jon Jones to get in shape? Jon Jones' last fight at light heavyweight was on February 8th, 2020. Apparently he won that fight. Then on August 17th, 2020, he relinquished the championship to move up to heavyweight. We didn't see him in the octagon until March 5th, 2023. That's 3 years and some change, or 2 years and 6 months if you're starting from the relinquish date. Or 2 years and 4 months because the Jones vs. Gane fight was announced on January 14th, 2020. Okay, for the sake of brevity, let's just say it took around 3 years for Jon to make up his mind and get ready. This caused a lot of people to see this as suspect, and one person even made the assertion that spending 3 years to gain 40 pounds is such an insane lie. Now, the 3-year gap wasn't only for the training, we'll get to that later, but this is a valid belief to have, at face value. Former rival Alexander Gustafsson was able to go from fighting Anthony Smith at light heavyweight to fighting Fabricio Verdum at heavyweight, and it only took a year. Then he was grapple fucked and submitted within the first 3 minutes of round 1. Kennedy Nzechukwu, on the other hand, had a successful debut at heavyweight. He also fought against that name, and he won. However, this seems more like a situation where a major change needed to happen quick or risk getting cut. Bro already lost 5 times in the UFC, including a fight against a 40-year-old Ovin St. Preux as a -700 favorite. It's okay, I didn't need those $2 anyways. Also, his first heavyweight bout was against Chris Barnett. Granted, he messed up his leg before the fight even started, but still, we'll have to wait until he gets past the wall of obese fighters to see if he's actually a contender. The best example of a successful modern heavyweight transition has to be Daniel Cormier. Dog went from cooking Volkan Ozdemir on January 20th to knocking out Stipe on July 7th in the same year. An insane achievement. However, I need you to take a look at this photo of DC. I don't think enough people talk about how this man was somehow able to cut to 205 pounds. Look at this man during his cut. Look at his soulless eyes. Do you think he's having a great time on that scale? Disregard the towel incident because that could only take off so many pounds. This dude was able to make weight consistently and be so successful despite being built like a barrel. It's also worth mentioning that he is one of the strongest wrestlers in the UFC. What he did to Dan Henderson and Josh Barnett is absolutely insane. And speaking of Josh Barnett, that fight along with every other fight before Patrick Cummings was at heavyweight. I'm assuming that out of respect for his teammate Cain Velasquez, he decided to terrorize the light heavyweight division instead. So basically, DC was a heavyweight who fucked around and became a light heavyweight champion. Now, Jon Jones is a great wrestler in his own right, but at the same time, his skill set was perfect for the light heavyweight class. And there are 2 routes for him to take if he wanted to move up. Either he could take the same route that Alexander Gustafsson took, or he could try something else. And guess what? Jon tried something else. Jon's plan was to go from around 230 pounds to around 275 pounds and then work his way down. Okay, off rip, gaining at least 30 pounds healthily is going to take at least a year. Emphasis on the word healthily. Anybody can hit up a Taco Bell for 6 months straight and get big, but don't be surprised if your organs rip out of your body and summon the ghost of Kimbo Slice to beat your ass. Any nutritional dude will tell you that putting on that kind of weight too quickly will prolong your conditioning, and that's the least of your problems. I think 1 to 2 pounds is generally recommended, and if you factor in the strength and conditioning training, that's probably at least 2 years of maintenance. If you think that's bullshit, imagine your high school football practice but 5 times worse. If you've never played sports past middle school, then watch this video of Gilbert Burns going through 15 minutes of fuckery. Now, if you told me that Jon Jones, the man who spent the majority of his adult life around 230 plus cutting to 205, who's entering his mid-30s, who was so anal about his training that he turned down a short notice fight against Chael Sonnen and only took the fight later with a full camp to learn how he strikes, moves, and shits. If you told me that it took 3 years for that guy to get ready to face top 3 caliber heavyweights, I'd be somewhat concerned, but I wouldn't be surprised. But that long layoff wasn't only due to his training, and this leads to the next part of the story, the contracts. On March 27th, 2021, Francis Ngannou got his lick back against Stipe Miocic. Jon Jones responded on Twitter by saying "let's go baby," implying interest in a potential bout. But a day after the event, Jonathan Bonathan Jonathan goes on a multi-tweet tirade asking for his release. One could conclude that Jon saw Francis win the belt in the best way he knew how and said fuck that. I actually got that as a response. Y'all got any more than pixels? However, we have this thing called context. See, back in May 2020, news broke out that Jon Jones and UFC head Baldy Dana White were beefing over fighter pay. Dana claims that Jon Jones was asking for $30 million doll hairs for a fight against Francis. I think Conor made that from his second Destin bout, but Dana's asserting that this was an absurd request and insinuates that Jon Jones is pretty much pricing himself out of the fight. Oh shit. Now Jon obviously disputed this, calling it bullshit, he never even made a number offer, and the suits thought he already made enough money as is. A year later, and the same disagreement is still happening, with Jon saying show me the money, and Dana responding by saying that the money was an excuse not to fight. 4 days after the Stipe and Ngannou fight, he claimed that he had a phone call with UFC lawyer/businessman Hunter Campbell, and told him that 8 to 10 million was way too low for the fight. Alright, stop. That's just true. A Francis Ngannou-Jon Jones fight would have fed generations. Okay, now continue. This is a difficult dilemma we have on our hands. On one side, we have D1 crash out Jon Jones, and on the other, we have the man who willingly created a league where people slap each other as hard as they can. This is a Tito Ortiz away from a Nightmare Blunt rotation. As much as I don't trust Jon Jones in general, I have to say that I trust Dana White less, especially in this situation. I mean, back in the day, Jon was scheduled to fight Anthony Rumble Johnson before getting arrested. Now, Johnson might not be as scary as Francis to some people, but he was still incredibly dangerous, especially around that time. Besides that, when people accuse Jon of lying, it's usually about him claiming that he's a good person, or being natty. But when people accuse Dana of capping, it often has something to do with money or these kids not wanting to fight. Remember when he defended the Reebok deal?
And I'd sit here and lie to you if I said, oh yeah, it's great for us. It's not. I'm gonna make less money off sponsors.
I say something, I'm gonna get my ass kicked.
I'm pretty disappointed by it.
I mean, yeah, it's good. You get something.
I just don't know how the deal could be any better.
Fighters with 1 to 5 bouts experience receive $2,500 under the tiered payment system. Those with 6 to 10 fights get $5,000, 11 to 15 bouts earn $10,000, 16 to 20 fights receive $15,000 and fighters with 21 bouts or more get $20,000. Champions receive $40,000, while challengers in a title bout get $30,000.
And the claim that fighters not wanting to fight is basically his all reliable. He claimed that Demetrius Johnson in 2017 didn't want to fight, then Jorge Masvidal in 2020 didn't want to scrap, and Dustin Poirier around the same time didn't want to smoke, even though he was campaigning for a fight against Tony Ferguson, insinuating that he priced himself out of the fight. Wait, that sounds so familiar.
Listen, I like Dustin. I'm not going to sit up here and say anything negative about Dustin. He's a great kid. You know, I don't know if it was he didn't want to fight in Abu Dhabi or what his deal was. He didn't want to fight. If you don't want, there's a lot of different ways to turn down a fight. Negotiating yourself out of one is one of the ways you can do it. So for whatever reason, he didn't want to take this fight. Only he knows that.
It is possible, however, that Jon Jones requested $30 million, but I want to emphasize this. Dana White is claiming that. I've been looking everywhere and I couldn't find anybody credible to corroborate this. He says he has receipts but never released them. And just to throw this in there, this isn't the first time where Jon was asking for more guap before a fight, according to unsealed messages. The article also shows what Dana really thinks of him. Tough. Regardless, Jon Jones remained in contract negotiation limbo for a couple of years. Now, what was Francis Ngannou doing around this time? After knocking out Stipe, Francis was set to fight Cyril Gane for the undisputed heavyweight championship. According to the large Cameroonian man, the UFC suits kept telling him that Jon Jones didn't want to fight him. Something about Jones minding his own business with a lot of money in his account, even though they were both on Twitter asking for it. Interesting. But around 2023, Ngannou claimed that he was offered around $8 million for the Jon Jones fight and was expected to rematch Stipe and then Jon again afterward, before making his move to boxing. $8 million, huh? Well, I'm already seeing a connection here, but let's keep going. During the whole contract hullabaloo, Francis made it clear that he wanted two major demands to be fulfilled. First, the aforementioned boxing dreams, and second, he wanted his fellow UFC fighters to be hooked up with health insurance and better sponsorship deals. The money wasn't as much of a major factor, probably because of the boxing, but it's worth noting that back in May 2020, he wanted way more money for a potential Jon Jones bout because he believed that it would be a monumental fight. In the end, the UFC and Ngannou failed to reach an agreement. He left the UFC and was stripped of the heavyweight championship. Then on January 14th, 2023, it was announced that Jon Jones would face Cyril Gane for the vacated belt. Jones also signed a new 8-fight contract, lol. We don't know how much he got out of it, but apparently he was expected to make around $15 million for the Stipe fight. Take that with a grain of salt, since these UFC contracts are nowhere near as transparent compared to other sports. With that being said, here's source 1, source 2, and source 3. Oh, and remember Dana's all reliable? Well, the Kingpin went on to tell the media that Francis was the one that didn't want the fight, implying that he would rather take less risks by fighting lesser opponents and getting a bigger payday. And he even basically said, "Hey man, we try to work it out, but I'll tell you that Jon wasn't the one that fucked it up." On that note, I think it's time to wrap it up. So let me get this straight. Jon Jones relinquished his light heavyweight championship to move up to heavyweight, but before that, he got on Twitter and asked for a fight against Francis, and then he asked for $30 million to fight him. Dana says no, and Jon gets fat anyways. Then Jon watches Francis knock out Stipe, says fuck that, and either he knew or prayed to God that Francis and the UFC were gonna have a fallout resulting in him leaving, and when that happened, Jon called up Hunter and told him, is he gone? Great, now hook me up with that championship fight. This scenario already sounds insane, but add in the fact that I have to believe that Dana White told the truth on 3 separate instances that involve 2 topics that he often lies about. I think this is a time where the simplest explanation is most likely the one that's correct, Gotham's butthole or something like that. Look, I think what probably happened is that Jon wanted to move up to heavyweight, but also wanted to get paid. The UFC said no, and Jon remained in limbo. On the other side, Francis wanted a better contract and his homies to get hooked up. The UFC said no, and Francis dipped. After that, Jon signed a new contract and the rest is history. He probably got a better deal considering that the heavyweight division was/is lacking in star power, but makes up for it in a disturbingly high BMI index. To simplify all of that even more, Jon Jones and Francis Ngannou wanted to fight, but the UFC fumbled. That's what I think happened. And for what it's worth, even Francis believes that the UFC is at fault for this fight not happening. And for what it's worth ×2, AI is on my side, so checkmate losers. And if I'm wrong about this, then I'll happily admit that I was, but we probably won't get any definitive evidence anytime soon, if ever. Now, why do people believe that Jon ducked him? Well, it's a mix between people not liking him and the whole Tom Aspinall situation. His reputation with fans is in the gutter. A lot of people believe that he's a sociopathic cokehead with drinking problems who also puts hands on his fiance. When an accusation is made against him that is viewed as negative, fight fans are willing to believe it regardless of if they actually knew what happened, especially when afterwards he's actually doing a thing that people accused him of beforehand. Think about the Conor McGregor situation. That story is worth a whole video that I'm definitely not making. I don't care if you believed he did it or not, just think about how many people shared the disdain for Conor without being tapped in, all because he's a supreme dickhead. That's all I have to say about the situation. This is probably going to be a one-off. The idea of being an MMA YouTube guy makes me really uncomfortable. The main reason I made this video is because I had all this research in my think box and it had to go somewhere. I'm not even going to go with the whole your reputation matters or try not to speak at an ignorance spiel, so I'll see you later.